Katharine, thank you for joining us today. For the people who are not very familiar with your work, could you shortly introduce yourself?
I'm Katharine. I'm a freelance narrative designer and writer, and I've been in games for a while, but I've changed roles several times from sound design, programming, game design, but mainly I'm narrative design these days.
So, throughout your career, you've had a lot of opportunities to work on both AAA and indie projects. When it comes to narrative design, is the approach essentially different depending on the type of project? And if so, do you have a preference, and why would that be?
I think this is one of the major issues for people working with story in games, actually, because there are standard formats in TV and film, right? But between each project, even if it's on the same platform, even if it's a mobile game, for example, each change in genre requires a completely different structures almost, and the requirements really change from game to game. So I would say, like, the game I recently worked on, which is a very narrative-driven project called Astrologasta. It really was so heavy in script and dialogue that it let me do quite a lot. So I quite enjoyed that, because it was gave me a lot of freedom to, didn't have to fit around the gameplay in a really tight way. I could, there was a lot of space to let characters kind of talk to each other and dynamics to evolve. Yeah.
What inspired you to pursue comedy in games?
Years ago I was making a tech demo. So I learnt this new piece of technology, and I thought, I'll make a demo. I thought, I might as well be a game, right? And it ended up being a sort of a humorous comedy game. And then someone, like a friend of a friend, who was making a game called Butterfinger. It's like a kung fu comedy game. She said, "Your little game you made was really funny. Can you do the narrative design and writing for Butterfingers?" And then I did that, and then that led to Astrologasta. But also, to step back a bit, when I was a game designer, I worked on a pony franchise called Pony Friends, and I decided, as the game designer, we needed a quest system. And then they said, okay, you can have a quest system, but you have to write the quest, and you have to write the dialogue and the characters and stuff. And so I did, and I quite enjoyed that. And I introduced comedy into it, even though I'm not sure there was supposed to be comedy.
Would you say that comedy in the gaming landscape is less prominent than in other areas of the entertainment industry? And if so, why would you think that is?
Yeah, I would say that's definitely the case, and I'm going to talk about that tomorrow at AdventureX, actually, a bit. I think some of that is definitely changes in genre and technology, as well as cultural and sort of market changes. When people are nostalgic about comedy games, they often think of, like, Curse of Monkey Island, or like LucasArts games, for example, in the 90s, or they go back to the 80s and they think of some of the adventure games they played in the 80s, where humor is a big thing. And I think when 3D graphics and realism and violence in games became more of a thing, like more action games, the chit chat stopped a bit in games, and it became less of a thing. But I would say also there's cultural reasons. Like, I think comedy isn't as valued in games as it is in TV and film. I think maybe there's a bit of cultural cringe in games, where we're trying to prove that we can do serious, important work as well. And, we're trying to prove that we're kind of like, we're grown up, so we can make games for adults. And, so pure comedy games I don't know, actually. That's a really cool question to think about more. Like, why don't we have romantic comedies? Why don't we have sitcom style games.
Our last question that we ask for everybody is, if you were to offer one piece of advice to someone who's just now starting their career as a narrative designer, what would that be?
I guess my advice would be like think beyond the writing and like really do your research on what narrative design is, and then acquire those skills.
Thank you so much.